Yeah, good evening and welcome to my talk. It's titled Practical Security Awareness, Lessons Learned and Best Practices. First, I would like to introduce myself a little bit. I started with computers back in the mid-late 1980s on this East German Robotron small computer with 4 megahertz and data put on music cassettes. So when we wanted to program stuff, we had to put in music cassettes and find the place where the data was stored. So since then, I didn't leave IT. I started around 25 years ago with my first personal computer, got into hacking, open source. I was a NetBSD developer for some years. I was involved in the PostgreSQL project for some time. And I've always been fascinated with IT security, especially with cryptography. And over the years, I conducted several large security awareness campaigns as a freelancer, as an advisor for companies. I also studied educational science and psychology and wrote my thesis on the measurement of security awareness. So I did the theoretical scientific foundation during my university years, during my study. And I'm also currently doing research about the effectiveness of awareness campaigns. Now, that's a field, a problem that hasn't been solved yet, and where a lot of research is finally going on. It was neglected for decades in IT security. IT security was considered to be a technical problem only, and the human factors side was ignored, which has to do with computer science ignoring human factors, and psychologists often not interested in doing research in the field of industrial psychology or technological use or human factors and man-machine interaction. But this has changed, and nowadays a lot of research is going on in this field of social engineering, security awareness, and other areas in this domain. I have several talking points in this talk. The first one is about the motivation of your workforce, because without motivation, nothing ever gets done. Then I will speak about the didactics or instructional design of a security awareness campaign. Then a very short slide about dealing with complexity. It's a huge topic, but if you want to go in deep or in depth in it, you have to do a lot of psychological research or have to understand and read a lot of psychological literature. And since this audience here isn't psychologists, I'll have shortened it. Another problem that often hinders the success of security awareness campaigns is the transfer of training outcomes to the job, so-called learning transfer. It's nice to have a talk given to you about how a secure password, how a strong password has to look like, but if you don't get the time and the option to use it on your job, to change your password, to train what you have learned, most people will not use the outcome, the learning outcomes, and therefore it will get lost in the training. I will also tell you something about the evaluation of security awareness campaigns, because it's important for you as someone who has to design an awareness campaign. You can only learn if you evaluate the awareness campaigns you have conducted, and evaluation also gives you arguments in the discussion with the management about financing awareness campaigns. Companies often don't want to spend money on IT security because it works and we don't have any problems, but you have to present arguments why awareness campaigns or other security measurements are important. And in the end, I will talk a bit about life hacking. I will not show a life hacking, but I will show you how to embed it in an awareness campaign, especially when you have to talk to people who have no clue of IT security, and who are not interested in IT security, because life hacking is a valid tool to raise the motivation of the workforce of a company. So first, when we talk about motivation, we often have, or you often see in the literature and in other publications, the hierarchy of needs, of basic needs created by Maslow back in the 1950s, 60s. And the most important thing here is to keep in mind that the basic needs have to be fulfilled. Without the basic needs fulfilled, people can't be motivated. And fulfilling basic needs of your workforce means you don't put them under pressure, you don't threaten them to fire them, You don't threat them to fire them if they fail at training and other stuff. This often happens in companies. It often happens in companies that people use negative or dark psychology to influence the workforce. And if you do this, every training you will conduct will fail because people are worried about the job security, about the safety. And when you are worried about your job security, you cannot focus on the training. Could you please be a bit? Another thing about motivation is that according to the two-factor theory of Herzberg, you can only actually demotivate people. Motivation is a huge field in psychology. A lot of research is done. A lot of money is poured into motivational psychology from people who want to sell you something, from people who want to motivate you to do something and other things. So a lot of research is going on there. And actually, I found the theory of Herzberg quite interesting because, according to him, satisfaction, the positive motivation, can only come from intrinsic factors. That means your workforce has to have a sense of achievement, they have to get recognized, and they have to take over responsibility. This is the only way to get your people satisfied and therefore motivated to do something. But discontent, demotivation, can happen when you do something about their status, when they fear losing their job, and when the relations between co-workers and superiors are tainted. So according to Herzberg, you actually can only demotivate people, and that's something that often happens in companies, unfortunately. So when I get there as an external advisor, or have to analyze the culture of the company, and I find such a company or a company has such a culture, it's actually almost useless to conduct any kind of training there because it won't work. Could you please shut up? Another thing that is or one of the basics of motivation in psychology is that we differentiate between intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. Intrinsic motivation is actually the thing we always want to have when we do trainings or other things. Intrinsic motivation means that the behavior of someone is driven by internal rewards. But unfortunately, intrinsic motivation cannot be found in everyone for every topic. Not everyone is interested in IT security. And intrinsic motivation can easily be destroyed, unfortunately. For example, when you get paid for doing something you like. That's an effect that has been measured, for example, in sports. When people who love to play a sport get paid to play the sport, they lose their interest in the sport. And this effect might also inhibit the motivation of your workforce. Extrinsic motivation is actually any motivation or behavior that is done to earn either an external reward or to avoid a punishment. Avoiding a punishment, think of the experiments done by B.F. Skinner, who put animals on electrical plates, and whenever they pushed a button, they got an electric shock into their feet. Now, a small shock, but nonetheless an electrical shock, and they changed their behavior according to avoiding these electrical shocks or getting these electrical shocks. So motivation is a huge topic, motivation is a huge problem, and unfortunately, when you work together with management, with people who studied economy, they often have a rather simple view of how motivation works, or let's say a mechanical view of how motivation works. This also extends to computer scientists. When I was still at university, we had seminars in knowledge management together with psychologists, economists and computer scientists, and it was quite interesting to see how computer scientists and economists view motivation. They have a very, from a psychological point of view, a very simple understanding of motivation. And unfortunately, motivation is the first step in every behavior, and if motivation is destroyed or there is no motivation, there will not be any behavior. So motivation is the first thing you have to take care of. Unfortunately, this is very complex and depends a lot on the culture of the company or organization you're in. So when you would want to motivate someone, you have to communicate with them. Communication is about motivation, or motivation is about communication. Motivation means that the other party shows a behavior I want them to show. They shall behave in a way I want to influence them. Motivation also means that someone has to drop an old behavioral pattern in favor of a new pattern. Motivation means, therefore, that you have to address an unfulfilled need and show how to fulfill it. Now, you have to find those unfulfilled needs. That means you have to do a lot of analysis. You have to talk to the workforce, to the people. What needs do they have with regards to IT security? And often companies are not interested in doing this research. There are some standard answers that apply to everyone working with IT and working with IT security or having a job. But unfortunately, it varies with the type of company you are in. If you're working for a company that cannot fail, maybe something like town management or something, they can't go bankrupt because they're living on tax money, and when money is tight, they raise the taxes. And therefore, those people are almost never have to fear losing their job, at least in Germany, and motivating them is quite complicated. Trying to motivate them with not losing their job doesn't work, because they are on a tenure track for life and cannot be influenced this way. So you have to do a lot of qualitative research, you have to do a lot of interviews, you have to talk with the people about the needs they have, and you have to show them how to fulfill these needs. It's also, or it has been shown, that you can motivate someone better when they are able to picture the fulfillment of the need better. Or as they say in advertisement, don't sell the steak, sell the sizzle. That's what they do in sales. They don't want to sell facts, they want to sell a feeling, an emotion. Just think of a typical TV advertisement for a soft drink, like Coca-Cola or 7-Up or whatever. They don't sell the fact that you are thirsty and you can quench your thirst with drinking a Coke. They sell you a lifestyle, a feeling, an emotion. That's also a thing that luxury goods do, like luxury cars or jewels or perfume or something like that. They always sell the sizzle. And that's something we sometimes have to do in IT security or when we do trainings. But unfortunately, we have to find out what the sizzle is, what the people need, what they want to see, what they're interested in. And this is a lot of hard work, and it is also time consuming, because when you do interviews in this field of research on this state, or level of the awareness campaign, we have to do a lot of qualitative research, talking with the people and analyzing these interviews. And this is time consuming, and this has to be done by psychologists or social scientists who are trained to do qualitative research. Often companies want to sell out a questionnaire, because a questionnaire can be automatized. You can set up a website, do a little bit of Perl and R and statistics, and then you get a report done in LaTeX, and then it looks good, and you have a lot of numbers and percentages, and everything is fine. But quantitative research is often not suited in this state of the awareness campaign. You have to do qualitative research talking to the people in a free interview, not even a guided or structured interview, in a free interview. And this is, unfortunately, time consuming. What you have to keep in mind or take away when talking about motivation is only current behavior can be influenced at once. Only the behavior shown now can be influenced. Every recurring behavior has been trained through learning processes. And this means that the change of a recurring behavior requires new learning processes. And every learning process takes a time. Someone who has been using weak passwords or had the habit of writing down the password on a post-it note and put it on your TFT for 20 years cannot change his behavior in a week or 2 weeks. They need time to change, especially when the new behavior is very complex. Selecting a good password, a strong password, and keeping it secret is actually something that can easily be done with a good designed or well-designed training, but other more complex processes take more time. So the changing of a behavior takes time. That's the key point of this slide. Now I'd like to go into the instructional design or didactics of a security awareness campaign. That's actually my field of research. I'm doing the most research at least currently, and it's quite important because didactics or instructional design is about the teaching methods, how to teach something. And it's not only about the methods, it's about who has to learn what he has to learn or she has to learn. Didactics is actually the theory and practice of teaching and learning, and it is the science that turns you into a teacher. Being a good computer scientist, being a good cryptographer, programmer, whatsoever is nice, but doesn't make you a good teacher, because you have to learn how to teach something, how to break down complexity, how to provide information in which way, how people learn, how people structure their learning processes. And this is done in general didactics, at least in Germany. Germany and the German-speaking countries are a bit special in this way, because we have a very strict vocational and professional training. Other countries don't have, or at least don't have anymore. France and the United Kingdom and other countries had it in the medieval times when we still had the guilds. We kept our guilds in Germany, in Austria and Switzerland, and partly in Denmark and the Netherlands. And therefore we still have a very strict training set up for professions like electrician, car mechatronics, and so on. And therefore we do a lot of research in this field, especially when it comes to the training of vocational professional workers or in vocational schools. So we have general didactics, which is actually about general teaching methods. How does teaching work? How do people structure their teaching or learning processes? And then we have specific didactics, which with regards to a specific learning fields. Think of subject in school. Mathematics need other specific didactics and teaching methods than German literature or history or computer science. Of course, there are fields that benefit from other fields. Computer science can benefit from electrical engineering, from computer science, from mathematics, and from other fields. Another problem we have when we do instructional design, or a problem we had in Germany until the 1970s, is that the learning outcomes might get obsolete. My father was trained as a plumber in the late 60s, early 70s, and he had to memorize the measurements of special pipes, like the diameter and the arc of a bow and other stuff, and this gets obsolete when a new system is introduced. So memorizing facts and numbers might not be the best way. It is better to teach people how to get those numbers, where to get those numbers, other catalogs, other standards, are there other things where to get those from. And this is called obsolescence process, a thing we have, or a thing we also have in computer science. Languages might get obsolete, methods might get obsolete, and therefore we have to train people to deal with these obsolescence processes, that they don't learn facts that might get obsolete in the next year or 5 years, and they have to learn how to get new information, how to deal with that new information, how to get informed on the new information. And for example, the complexity in the trainings of plumbers in Germany increased immensely. They are now also responsible not only for fitting pipes into a toilet, but they also deal with air conditioning, heating systems, and other stuff. They have to do with computers. They have to program computers, not with C and assembler, but they have air conditioning systems that have to be programmed, and they have to learn how to understand how that programming works. Another example in Germany is the car mechanic. Actually, the profession was renamed into car mechatronic, and now car mechatronics learn, for example, about IP networks, CAN networks, CAN networks, and other stuff, because they have to deal with it when they repair a car. And therefore, the complexity has reached a new level, and we have to find the according teaching methods. And this is a huge problem when you do an awareness campaign, when you design a training, a workshop, or something else. What shall I include in my teaching content? What shall I teach them? What do they need? How do I break it up for them? How do I reduce complexity? In which levels do I feed it to them? Now, for example, there's a thing called click path, and teaching such a click path isn't viable. Now, there's a German computer magazine. It's famous for giving how-to tutorials in the way click on start, click on system settings, click on network settings, click on advanced network settings, then click on TCP IP adapters, and so on. And this is only viable for the current operating system they introduce. It's typically Windows by Microsoft, and if a new Windows version is coming out, it doesn't work anymore. So the click paths you memorize to change the network setting on Windows 7 don't work on Windows 8 anymore, and let alone on Windows 10. And especially not when you are forced to use a macOS, a Linux, NetBSD, or whatever you have. And this is one of the most important things, that you don't teach such click path or data that might get obsolete or might not transfer to another situation. So what do we do? In Germany, we have the model of so-called competencies in a psychological sense. And that means the first part or the first thing we have to do is find roles. If you go to the room with the posters, there's one poster from Tanz Institute about roles in IT security. And I have a different set of roles in my work, but they have tried to find general roles. And the idea of roles is who does what and how. And it also means who does or who is required to need something. Does the typical office worker need to know how, for example, MD5 or SHA-1 works in detail? Do they have to understand the mathematics behind it? Of course not. They are just office workers. But a programmer or a designer or someone who does IT security research has to understand how MD5 works and how MD5 now is obsoleted for certain areas or in cryptography and other stuff. And we usually use our professional fields of activity. We look up what are the typical actions someone does. And a secretary in office work, an accountant, has to change his password or her password every, let's say, 60 days or something like that. They have to know how to change a password, what a good password makes, what the rules are for a good password, but they don't have to understand the differences between MD5, SHA-1, PB, KDF2, and so on. They don't have to need to know it. But someone who designs such software, a programmer, a designer, software architect, security researcher, pen tester, and so on, they have to know what the differences are and why MD5 is obsolete and why SHA-1 isn't better than MD5 in this cryptographic context. And this is also a lot of work that has to be done. You have to understand what people are doing there. For general roles, that this can be summarized and applies usually to every company. Accountants do the same work in every company. It doesn't matter if it's a garage with 5 mechanics or if it's Volkswagen or Siemens, a huge company, they all do the same work and they all do the same IT security stuff they have to know. But with something like when you have to do a training for developers, for software architects, designers, and so on, you also have to be familiar with the field they are working in. You have to be familiar with cryptography and how to break it down, how to teach cryptography, how to teach MD5, SHA-1, and so on to them. And this is translated in the German vocational schools into a so-called learning situation, which is based on the professional action, what they are doing in their work. And when we create a new curriculum for a new profession or modernize a profession, we often meet up with people working in those professions. And we also send out scientists or researchers, social scientists, who just stand there and watch how people work, what they are doing when they're working. And this is something you also might have to do when you create an awareness campaign for a company. You have to know what they are doing in their 8-to-5 work, if it's not a generic company that does just accounting or something like that. And this also takes time. It takes a lot of research, and is often companies are not willing to do it. But it's when you design an awareness campaign on your desk, you might get lucky and it might work, but actually the professional way is to do this analysis, to look into the company, to do an analysis of the company culture and what they are doing and how they are learning and how they are acting, and then design your awareness campaign based on this research outcome. This is a professional way. So like I already said in the beginning, just a short excursus on complexity. I'm not speaking of complexity in the computer science sense, like big O notation and n log n and other stuff. It's more about the regulation or the psychological regulation of work. Complex work means you have to do a lot of complex regulation. A lot of brain muscles have to work if you do a lot of complex work. For example, this has been researched in engineering with designers when they do design complex systems like architects do, like engineers do. They have to put a lot of psychological regulation in it, and this is a field of industrial and organizational psychology. And there has a lot of research been done in the Soviet Union in the 1930s. A lot of basic research has been done there. It has been translated in East Germany at the University of Dresden by Winfried Hacker. And he did a lot of research in Germany about it, and unfortunately the English language psychology from the UK or from the US didn't take much information from their work, unfortunately. So you don't find much English language literature on it, but a lot of Russian and German literature on these topics. Actually, the thing that's interesting is the so-called theory of action. It's the idea or the theory how people decompose complex actions into a less complex actions. When you have a complex action, like maybe setting up a secure Linux laptop, you have to break it down into less complex actions. First, find the Linux distribution you want to install. People might say that Arch Linux is more secure than Ubuntu, or other people might say that OpenBSD is even more secure than Linux, and so on. And you have to find your distribution first, then you have to configure it, setting up a network, install your programs, and so on. And this can get very complex, and people have to deal with it. And you can take away complexity, or you can take away the work they have to do, make it easier for people, for your workforce, when you establish rules. For example, you set up rules on how a good password should look like. It might not be the best idea for everyone, but in some companies it might be useful to maybe create a flyer or a leaflet or an information brochure or manual or whatever, where you set up password rules. For example, the minimum length of a password has to be 12 characters. And it has to include at least one special character and a number. And then you have to explain to them why they have to change, or why they have to choose a password of this length and with a special character and so on. I did an awareness campaign in a large company some years ago, and one of the question in the research, in the initial research was, I interviewed several employees and asked them, are there any password rules? And everyone said yes. The rule was that after 3 months, after 19 days, you had to change your password. It had to have a length of, I think, 10 or 12 characters, and you couldn't reuse or recycle your last 3 passwords. So it was not that complicated. But some of the employees complained that every 2 weeks, they have to change the password, and the password have to have at least 30 characters. And of course, this isn't true to the facts, but in their opinion, in their worldview, they were forced by a computer to create a new password, and the password had to be of a minimum strength, a minimum length. And they didn't know how to create a password that was accepted by the computer because they didn't understand the rules. They were not taught the rules. They were not taught how to create a secure password. And therefore, they were afraid. They dreaded the day when they had to change the password, because for them it was a very complex task. And often, from a psychological view, it was maybe a black box for them. They didn't know what the rules were for the computer, what the rules were for a secure password, and so on. And after we did a training with them, we produced a leaflet with password rules. We explained them. They got time to transfer it into their everyday work. They understood it, and they were not afraid anymore of the password change. And this is something that can be achieved, for example, by creating such password rules, taking away the complexity of designing a password on your own, by giving them a tool to create a password and giving rules how the password has to look like. And here we are with one of the most decisive parts of an awareness campaign, or any training any training ever done in a company. It's about transferring the training outcomes to the job, or learning transfer. They are very important. A lot of research has been done in the last 20 years about this in knowledge management, psychology, economy, management, change management, and other stuff. And the learning transfer, or the problem of the learning transfer, is that the workforce learned something. They sat in a setting like you now, listened to a guy who has more knowledge than them, and they learned something, for example, that a good password should at least contain one special character, but they don't transfer it on the job. They still keep the post-it note on the monitor with the password, so everyone going in the office can see the password, something like that. And this has several reasons and is a huge problem in trainings. The reasons that have been identified are, or here's just a short list of several reasons that have been identified in the literature. The identification of training needs and interests of the workforce hasn't been done, or properly done. They are sent into a training they don't need. They learn or have to learn something they are not interested in because they don't need it. Then they don't have any motivation, and without motivation, no behavioral change, and everything is just done for the sake of it being done. The roles haven't been properly identified, relevant to the learning outcomes. You don't want to send in your accountant into a math lecture on the complexity of cryptography or something like that. They don't need it, they aren't interested in, it will fail. The determination of learning contents and learning places. can be very important to check where you are sending your people to learn. Are they used to such a setting? Sometimes your workforce left school, formal education, 30 or 40 years ago, and they aren't used anymore to sitting on a table for 2 hours and listening to some guy talking to them. And you might find other things interesting, like mobile learning. Maybe you produce a video for YouTube, a screencast, a videocast, or do smaller settings, do more action-oriented learning or other things. The instructional design is bad, the teaching methods are bad. Well, like I already said, you might find it's quite different if you have to train, or it is a huge difference if you have to train engineers and people who are not who are doing more manual work and are not used to trainings anymore. Another thing that's important for management is cost control and success control and evaluation. Evaluation is important for you as a trainer because you want to learn from the mistakes you made, from things that didn't work, from things that did work out, because you want to use them in the next training and other stuff. Learning transfer barriers on the job are usually the wrong selection of participants. That has to do with the roles. The learning outcomes are undefined or not clear enough. The learning contents don't fit to the job. This might also happen if you don't get time to look into the company and the culture of the company. The training is not accepted and carried by management and employees. Especially the management can destroy a training very easily if they don't accept it, if they think it's some kind of penalty if you're sent to a training. Some companies have this culture that people get sent to trainings as a penalty, and you've lost as a trainer if you're in such a situation. You can't train them properly anymore. Another thing I had in a large company was that they put hot glue into the USB slots of laptops because they wanted to prevent the workforce from using USB thumb drives. And the manager himself, the C-level executives and others, didn't even have passwords on the Windows machines. And in such a situation, even as a psychologist, you can't put out fairy dust and make the workforce accept these rules because they are, sorry for my French, they are bullshit and everyone knows it and it doesn't work. What also is a huge problem is that there is no time for the training and the transfer of the training outcomes. Transfer needs time. The awareness campaign isn't done when I leave the stage. The awareness campaign is done when I leave the stage. They had time to transfer it. They had time to talk to us again. We always offer a second date where we can meet and where they can ask us questions, because some question might only arise when they try to use the new password rules or whatever they learned in the daily job or on the daily job. And then we do the evaluation, and when the evaluation report has been given to the management, the awareness campaign is done for now. Another problem or barriers that might arise by the learners are the lack of insight into the applicability of learning contents on the job. The typical office worker says, what have I to do with network security, with IT security, with hacking? I'm just an office worker, I'm not interested in, I don't have any top secret data on my computer, I don't know anything special, no one will hack me. Yeah, but you are the secretary reading the info@ email where all the spam and phishing emails get on, and you are a primary target because they don't know that their computer is also an interesting target, a target of value. And this has to be taught to them, especially in the motivational field. The lack of practice, they need time and they have to use the time to practice a new learned behavior, and the lack of motivation. And trying to motivate people after the training is often even more complex than doing so before the training. So let's have a look into the evaluation of awareness campaigns. Evaluation is the methodological sound measurement, the science-based benchmarking of processes and outcomes. Science-based is very important, because often evaluation means you get a questionnaire an intern created 3 years ago, and you have to put on yes, no, or you have to give out school marks and mark your trainer or workshop or whatever, and then some guy's putting in a nice Excel spreadsheet and diagram and everyone is happy. But these are often not very sound measurements, because benchmarking, especially learning outcomes, is very, very complex. We do evaluation because we want to better understand and design practical training measures through the evaluation of effectiveness, controlling, and reflection. So we have to methodize and document processes and outcome. Now, this is a task done by the trainer, by the guy who does the awareness campaign. We have to document our processes, we have to document why we do something, because we did initial research when we found out that these problems have to be addressed, and so on and so on. The targets of evaluation are the success of the completed training, something that can easily be measured. For example, if we do a training on secure passwords, we can check if the new passwords are better than the old passwords. This can easily be benchmarked. We get a percentage number of new passwords that are good, and a percentage numbers of new passwords that are still as bad as the old passwords, and therefore we can say we had a success rate of 60% or something like that. We want to gather information for the instructional design of future trainings. We want to avoid mistakes, errors we've made, and of course we want to try to set up better trainings in the future. We also want to estimate and justify the costs of a training, especially the costs of not doing the training. When you have to talk to management, they often say, or there's the saying with system administrators, why do I have to pay you? Everything works fine. And when something breaks, they often shout at you, why do I pay you? Nothing works ever. And the same for trainings. We have to justify why we do want to do a training. And there is a nice saying from the chief financial officer, what happens if we spend money training our people and then they leave? And then the CEO answers, what happens if we don't and they stay? Because some companies don't have a culture of training. And this is also a different culture in several countries. The US is not that much focused on training their people in the companies than, for example, Germany does. And this was quite interesting when the German car makers like BMW, Volkswagen, and so on went to the US in Chattanooga and they set up internal trainings. And the German management was shocked to see that the American workforce wasn't interested in because they aren't used to it. And this is something you also have to keep in mind, that there might be intercultural differences when you do trainings, especially for huge companies. So how many times left? 10 minutes, 5 minutes? I don't know. Okay, 3 minutes, okay. Why life hacking? You all know probably, it's a bit dark, but you can imagine what's on that stock picture, a guy with a mask and gloves sitting in a computer because he is a hacker, he does illegal stuff and he doesn't want to be identified, hence the sunglasses and gloves. And this is actually a bit ironic, but this thing is a tool of storytelling. When I do a life hacking, I don't show them the life hacking to show them that I'm cool because I know how to use Kali Linux and fire up Metasploit and Armitage and how to hack my local host, but I want to show them what can happen, and I try to sell it to them. The first life hacking I conducted was years ago at a training for teachers, because there were security incidents at general schools in Germany, and the private or personal computers of a teacher got hacked, and their personal data was released on the schoolyard, and they invited me for a training, and I said, look, you have these 14, 15-year-old 8th graders, and if they spend a weekend or maybe an afternoon on YouTube, they find a lot of videos on hacking Windows. They will find videos on Kali Linux, on Metasploit, on whatsoever hacking tools are out there. And after 2 hours, after an afternoon, after maybe a weekend, they are able to at least start a generic attack on your generic Windows computer. And all it has to take is a bored or angry 15-year-old who is maybe technologically not that apt, but he is able to find videos on YouTube, follow these walkthroughs, these how-tos, install or download Kali Linux, fire up Metasploit. He only needs your personal or private IP address, which can easily be obtained by getting an email from you, and then he can attack you automatically with the big red Hail Mary button. This is not how professional hacking works, but in this situation, I try to tell them a story, and they are, after this introduction, they are motivated to keep an eye on their IT security because they know it might happen to them. And that's what I want to tell them. Storytelling is great because it motivates better than a dry list of facts. It has been used for centuries in all cultures of the world. Think of fairy tales. The typical Grimm fairy tales, not the Disney versions, but the raw, bloody German versions of our fairy tales, are there to train children on the dark side of the world. They are very good at the transportation of complex knowledge, and they generate memories and support learning mechanisms. This has been evaluated, it has been tested. Storytelling is a great tool. And that means embed maybe a life hacking into a fitting story or another thing to show them what's going on. And this is what I told them. Maybe a 15-year-old pupil is pissed off by a teacher, he spends an afternoon on YouTube, and then he uses Kali, Metasploit, or another hacker tool. And there have been examples found in the wild. Think of Mafia Boy, the 15-year-old Canadian high school pupil who shut down eBay, Amazon, Microsoft in 2000 with the use of Stacheldraht, a tool, a script written by a Chaos Computer Club hacker from Hannover. And he was just a script kiddie. He found that script by accident and fired it on Microsoft, eBay, and so on. And the news, the media hailed him as the new computer whiz kid. He was in talk shows and other stuff, but actually he wasn't a hacker, he was just a script kiddie with a lot of boredom during the Canadian winter holidays. And this is a good example, it's a real world example, it happened. There was a measurable damage done to Microsoft, to Amazon, eBay, and so on, and this is a good story that can be told. Now, there are other stories like Operation Payback, where a bunch of Dutch pupils, I think they were 15, 16, tried to DDoS banking sites after the banks closed the accounts of WikiLeaks, and they also got identified pretty easily because they didn't use any anonymization. They just fired, they just used a program called Low Orbit Ion Cannon from their computers, and therefore their IP addresses were identified, and they got put in front of a court. Fortunately for them, they were not adults yet, because the Dutch General Attorney tried to try them as terrorists, and they would have been sent to jail for, I think, 20 years or something like that. Yeah, you can find it on Wikipedia, look it up. And the bottom line of the story is the effort and complexity of an attack. It can easily be done by a 15-year-old pupil. Nokia, cool. If you want to show them something more, you can also show them so-called threat maps. There is a German project by Deutsche Telekom called Sicherheitstacho. Kaspersky offers its cyber map, where you can see in a command and conquer cyberpunk style attacks going on the world. This is for people who don't know how to read the log files, not for us, but for the management who says, I'm secure, I'm just a small company, no one is attacking me. And then you can show them, for example, in Germany, the Sicherheitstacho by Deutsche Telekom, and they see that there are attacks going on, mass attacks going on. I've also used honeypot successfully. I've rolled out maybe Raspberry Pi with a honeypot system. There are several things like LastPod, secure shell logins, and so on. Rolling out a honeypot in a company and then showing them the logs. And you can tell them, for example, it just took 30 minutes, or after 30 minutes, our honeypot was attacked the first time. So people are attacking your network. Maybe not directed, but automatically, but they are attacking your network. And this often is an eye-opener for management, especially when you use this ELK stack to put nice diagrams and pictures and percentages on the screen, and then they often say, oh my God, we're getting attacked, do something about it, yesterday. And this works. Another thing that you can use is Shodan to look up industrial control system and so on. I once did a seminar on critical infrastructure, unfortunately found Siemens Simatic industrial control systems of an Ukrainian power plant online, and we logged in there because the password was admin and the username was admin. So with admin we got into this Siemens step 7 control system, and I was able to remote control an Ukrainian power plant. This was really great because there was a workshop on critical infrastructure, and people were sitting there with big eyes, and they were shocked to see this work. They didn't know Shodan existed, and a lot of them asked the admins if their infrastructure can be reached from the internet. And a lot of sweat was breaking out on the admins. So I'm done, almost on time. Here are my contact data. Feel free to contact me. Send me an email, just put DeepSec or something in the subject that I know we met here. And yeah, question round or?
we've got time for 1 or 2 questions.
So in security, there is always this thing that this element of fear, which you probably would call a negative extrinsic motivation or something. Would you recommend reinforcing that, or would you rather recommend not to try to put too much fear into your audience?
We don't call it negative or extrinsic motivation, we call it black psychology, because actually fear is bad. It's probably the worst thing you can do to an individual being, because someone in a frightened state is unpredictable. And someone who is frightened behaves in a way you cannot control anymore, and this is something you don't want. You might use a bit of fear-mongering in a setting. For example, if you don't use a strong password, evil people from another country will come and take over your company and you will lose your job. But you have to immediately get them out of this state of fear. You have to show them how to change the password. So using fear is a big no. Never do it.
Especially when teaching, nobody will learn anything when
yes, of course. Fear is.
Okay. Any further questions?
You've mentioned that there's lots of psychology about this topic. Do you think that the topic will be taken over by psychologists who are not able to do the technical stuff themselves, like showing pen tests, whatever, but who want to, who are more into humans? Do you think that's the future?
I don't think so. I think psychologists who are not into technology can work in this field, for example, in the field of general instructional design, general didactics, general research evaluation, and so on. But there is a small subdivision of psychology in industrial psychology where for decades research has been done about the use of technology. And there are psychologists who have a lot of knowledge about technology, and they are still there. But the typical fields there are usually for example, man-machine interaction, how to design, for example, the control systems of a power plant and so on. Communication in airplanes is also a field. So there are psychologists who have to have a lot of knowledge in technology, and at least in Germany, these are the psychologists that earn the most money. For example, we have at our university, we have a huge cooperation with Volkswagen because we are close to Wolfsburg, about the design of cockpits. The modern cockpits, there are people, or there are things you have to avoid. There are things that can be done good and bad, and for example, Tesla is doing almost everything bad in the design of their cockpits. And there is a lot of research going on by psychologists, by computer scientists, user interface designers, industrial designers, artists, and so on, and everyone has to have a knowledge of the other fields. The engineers have to know a lot about human factors, man-machine interaction. The psychologists have to know a lot about programming. The designers have to know programming, engineering, and so on. And these fields exist since the 1950s, and I think computer science will become a new big subdomain in this topic, or already is with regards to man-machine interaction, user interface, and such.
Okay, thank you very much. I think you are available for further questions.